programme elsewhere this morning. Some rugby union news. Maro Itoje is set to be confirmed as the new British and Irish Lions captain this afternoon. This summer's tour, Australia, the 30-year-old will become the first Englishman since Martin Johnson in 2001 to be named Lions skipper. And finally, British number one, Katie Bolter, is out of tennis's Italian Open, but there were wins yesterday for Cameron Norrie and Emma Raducanu, whose first-round victory was preceded by a sightseeing tour of Rome.
Yeah, it's a bit of a different pre-match routine going Southampton. I just wanted to go out and stay pretty relaxed, but I feel like I've had 3 days in one, to be honest. I went to the Trevi Fountain and then had lunch outside on a patio, and it's weird because you're like kind of switched off, but you kind of know you have a match later on, so you're like, I don't know how I'm going to get myself up to play a match, and yeah, I'm really proud of how I kind of switched on.
Head down to the Vatican, couldn't you, and looked out for the white smoke. Jacob Fernley, the only British player involved at the Italian Open later today.
There you go. Next week, word searching thanks Mike, word searching comedy returns to Radio 4.
Hello, I'm Phil Wayne, here to tell you about the new series Unspeakable on BBC Radio 4.
Cutation. For example, how do I tell my friend I had zero cutation around her baby?
It's the show where comedians find new words to describe concepts that until now have been nameless.
Panicure, the act of nervously biting your nails.
With my wingwoman Susie Dent.
Have a modicum of decorum. That's what my headmistress used to say.
She sounds like a laugh.
And guests in the first episode, including Cindy Reed and Ed Gamble.
There's not much more to say, Phil. I won. Give me the prize.
Unspeakable, the new 6:30 comedy Tuesday nights on Radio 4 and BBC Sounds.
Time now, 28 minutes to 7. You're listening to Today on BBC Radio 4 with Emma Mr. Abby Robinson here in the studio alongside Jane Still. Who's got us on?
Britain and the United States are expected to announce a deal later today on reducing trade tariffs. President Trump posted on social media that he would announce an agreement with what he called a big and highly respected country at the White House. It's found the faster route, which saves 8 minutes, a deal since President Trump imposed sweeping tariffs on almost every country in the world. A national 2-minute silence at midday on the Hobbs Valley Baptist Day, approximately 2 hours to mark the 80th anniversary of the D-Day. The European grandsons of Winston Churchill proposed to take a deal of peace between 3-day ceasefire in Ukraine and Russia to coincide with operations as come to effect. Already been broken. The BBC understands the Israeli embassy in London was the initial target of a group of Iranian men arrested for the weekend on suspicion of committing a terrorist act. One of them still being questioned for complicity with the police raids. Last night, Iran's foreign minister said his country categorically denied to the embassy. Explosions have been reported in 2 cities in Pakistan. Tensions remain high with India after defeating the Kashmir. The Indian armies in India and Pakistan will exchange small arms and artillery fire last night. Pakistan issued a report to military sources. The statement shot down an Indian drone. Prisons Minister Gordon Gibson has warned that prisoners will remain in crisis if the Australian jail places available in the Indian told the BBC there was no plan for another emergency early release scheme. Catholic cardinals will return to the Vatican today in the second day of voting Tuesday afternoon. And thousands of people will gather in St. Square for the first vote to see black smoke emerge from the chimney of the Sistine Chapel. Jane, thank you very much. It's 25 minutes to 7, just coming up. So, and I'm coming to you live this morning from outside Westminster Abbey in London. The shadow of the house where there will be a thanksgiving service at midnight to mark the 80th anniversary since the end of World War II. But there are events happening throughout the day, right across the country and across Europe. Clubs are only allowed indoors to stay. And then it's all got hot dog, so you can raise a glass and a few other things going on in between every service
should say there will also be a concert on Horse Guards in central London this evening, and we've seen a lot of the King, and we've seen a lot of the Queen actually this week as well. We haven't heard directly from the King, but I think we are expecting to hear from the King later on today, and I'm sure that that message of thanks, which we've been hearing about all week, thanks to that generation that sacrificed so much, I'm sure will be part of his message.
It's a mixture of thanksgiving, isn't it, and remembrance at the same time, which I think is we're very mindful of sitting in the beautiful shadows here of Westminster Abbey, and also good to remind people they can raise a glass locally for 2 hours long. I might get a nap, set an alarm, and go back out to the pub now.
Right,
Sarah Campbell, thank you for listening.
It is 22 minutes to 7. The world held its breath yesterday after Indian missile strikes on targets in Pakistan and Pakistani administered Kashmir. Not that much seems to have happened since then, but our correspondent in Delhi, Samira Hussain, can tell us more. Is there some relief, Samira?
Well, it seems that, tensions are certainly very high. Everyone is very much on edge. And the Indian Army said that there was an exchange of gunfire between India and Pakistan overnight along that de facto border in Kashmir. But, people are really just sort of on edge, but not as much activity as we saw certainly this time 24 hours ago, when we saw that exchange of gunfire between and artillery shells between India and Pakistan along the line of control.
When Pakistan's Prime Minister claimed that 5 Indian jets have been shot down, it sounded as if he wanted to say to his countrymen, we have already retaliated, we don't need to do it.
It's a message that has also been reiterated in some ways during an address to the nation by Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif. And so I think that's certainly bringing a little bit of calm into the region if that is in fact the retaliation and if that is the message that he's trying to send to the region and to the world. Remember that the international community has really been urging for a lot of calm and restraint. We even heard from Prime Minister Keir Starmer yesterday in Parliament also expressing the same sentiments, because this world to de-escalation is really a priority, because so quickly can things escalate in the disputed region, and of course fear is that it could spill even further outside the region into wider India and Pakistan.
Saying thank you very much.
There's a 5-minute congestion on the M1 in 50.
The program, having heard
Still on the fastest route.
Pakistan on yesterday's program.
It's 20 to 7 all morning on this 80th anniversary to mark the end of World War II in Europe. We are coming to you live from outside Westminster Abbey, and it being in the heart of Westminster, I'm joined in person for once by our chief political correspondent, Henry Zeffman. Good to see you in person this morning, and rather fittingly, as we think of the work achieved by the Allied forces and our partnership, our alliance with America, what news of a reported trade deal?
That's right, Emma. Significant moment this. We are expecting the UK and the US to announce a deal to reduce tariffs today. It's something that the UK has been seeking for the month and a bit since Donald Trump had what he called his Liberation Day, when he unleashed a wave of tariffs on pretty much every country in the world. Important to stress, Donald Trump has trailed this on social media by describing it as a, all caps, major trade deal with representatives of a big and highly respected country. It's not a comprehensive free trade deal of the sort the UK announced with India earlier this week, we think. But nevertheless, I think will be seen in Downing Street as a significant achievement diplomatically and economically.
Because this is what was being worked on by the previous Conservative government.
Well, what the previous Conservative government wanted was a comprehensive free trade deal. This is a more specific response to
the
Donald Trump's particular...
But my point was nothing was reached, unless, in case people weren't aware of that, it gets to that point.
Exactly, and likewise on India. And in the course of 3 days, you're going to see very visible progress from this UK government in negotiations with both India and on the US. I mean, I think what we need to watch for later is what specifically has been agreed. We know the UK was seeking to reduce tariffs, particularly on steel and cars. We know the US wanted something of technology. There were all those very suggestive answers from government ministers not ruling out reducing the digital services tax, which is paid here by some US tech giants. Let's see what happens there. But I think they will be very happy in Downing Street, if they can, with this capricious president. get it over the finish line today, and it appears that they have.
We will watch out for all those details. Thanks for flagging them. And just after 8 here on this programme today, we'll be joined by the Defence Secretary, John Healey. Just put us in the picture, Henry, about how serious the challenge is facing the government on defence, the size of our military, our power in the world as we think 80 years on from 1945.
It's a massive challenge, and it was a massive challenge that was facing successive UK governments before Donald Trump became president of the United States, but clearly that challenge has been shaken up and magnified by President Trump. We're probably seeing here on tariffs a dividend of Keir Starmer's undoubtedly good diplomatic relationship with Donald Trump, but I think what a lot of people will also be looking for is a dividend when it comes to security in Europe and his attitude in particular to Ukraine. This UK government has set the UK on a path to higher defence spending. I don't think there's anyone who doesn't think that at some point that path is going to have to get even higher to even higher defence spending, but this is at a time of massive fiscal challenges, massive political vulnerabilities for this government, lots of pressure on them to spend money on lots of different things, and I think it is the challenge that lies at the heart of all the many challenges facing this government.
Henry Zeffman, we'll let you get back to your stomping ground in Westminster as we sit here beneath Westminster Abbey. Good to see you. Thank you.
70 minutes to 7. If there is a trade deal today, that will be good news for Sir Keir Starmer. He had a slightly more uncomfortable day yesterday in Parliament when he was forced to defend the government's decision to means test winter fuel payments for pensioners. Here's our parliamentary correspondent, Sean Curran.
Both Labour and the Conservatives have been nursing dents to their pride after last week's local elections. But whatever was being said behind closed doors, Labour MPs gave Sir Keir Starmer a noisy welcome when he arrived for Prime Minister's questions. Labour's election post-mortem has seen a group of about 45 MPs call on the Prime Minister to focus on winning back the support of voters in Northern England and the Midlands. They're particularly concerned about the decision to cut winter fuel payments for millions of pensioners.
Leader of the opposition, everybody.
And the Conservative leader was keen to exacerbate the tensions in the government's ranks.
Does the Prime Minister now admit that he was wrong to remove the winter fuel payment for millions of pensions?
Minister, Mr. Speaker, the number one job of this government was to put our finances back in order after the
Sir Keir Starmer said the government had stabilised the economy and was committed
Running next to it, goodness gracious, the cat music beauty hopefully technicians to help us get on with that. And also moving across regions of when that's the need to drive that's not easy to do, but given the sector that we are driving the highways, reasonable. And then we also need people to play their concerts and watering gardens early in the day and late in the night, rather than the day, running dishwashers and machines, whatever. Even if we more comfortable.
has been finally overcome.
On this day, 80 years ago, the Prime Minister Winston Churchill addressed the nation on the BBC. Ever since, VE Day has brought together people all over the country to celebrate the end of the Second World War. But that is not a feeling shared in those parts of Europe in which Nazi occupation and repression was simply replaced by that of the Soviet Union. Throughout the programme, we're going to be hearing voices of celebration, but we also wanted to reflect on the different ways in which this day is experienced in different parts of the world. And I've been speaking to a friend of the programme, Poland's Foreign Minister Radek Sikorski, who spent much of his early life here in the UK, about the differences in the way the two countries see May the 8th, which is where we began our conversation.
Two basic differences. So in Poland, we tend to remember, and in Britain you tend to forget, that the Second World War was mainly fought on the Eastern Front. 80% of German war losses were on the Eastern Front, not in the West. And secondly, the 8th of May, Polish troops were in Berlin together with the Red Army, taking Berlin, but was not really a liberation day for us. We exchanged a genocidal German Nazi occupation for a totalitarian Soviet occupation, and we only emerged into freedom 45 years later.
Yesterday, when you were speaking to EU foreign ministers, you suggested that the true story of the war is getting lost, and deliberately so in the case of Vladimir Putin, because he wished to distort it.
Yes, he's appropriating the story, the narrative of the Second World War to Russia. So first of all, they no longer admit that the Second World War started with the Nazi and Soviet attack on Poland in September 39. They only start counting it with the Nazi attack on the Soviet Union, and then they conflate Soviet losses with Russian losses. They did lose 20 million people, but the losses in Belarus or Ukraine were higher than in Russia. Because Belarus and Ukraine were all occupied. Belarus lost a quarter of the population. Millions of Ukrainians were murdered and also fought in the Red Army. And so they have every right to claim this as partly their victory. And of course, Putin is also using the anti-Nazi sentiment to besmirch a democratic country that he's trying to conquer.
Turning to what's happening now in Ukraine, there is what Vladimir Putin presents as a one-sided ceasefire that began last night. What do you think is likely to follow?
No, the essential point is that after so many concessions by President Trump, Vladimir Putin has not responded with a single one. And I hope the White House realizes that he's hardline, he's not responding, and therefore a different policy has to be adopted.
We heard from President Biden on the program yesterday, suggesting that Donald Trump's demands that Ukraine gave up territory were modern-day appeasement.
I don't advise Ukraine what sacrifice she may or may not be ready to make for the sake of ending this war, but we now see clearly that it is Putin who is not accepting even a 30-day ceasefire, which Ukraine has accepted.
And is he right, Biden, to suggest that America is now an unreliable ally, and that countries on the border with Russia, not necessarily Poland under your leadership and Donald Tusk's, but that other countries may, in his words, accommodate the Kremlin because they don't think America will come to their support?
I think this is an issue for America in both its strategic directions. The US needs to maintain credible coalitions to hem in China and also to deter Russia. And to keep your allies on side, they have to be convinced that you will come to their assistance. And I don't think anybody wants to take responsibility for a deal with a leader, Vladimir Putin, who notoriously lies in public. Remember, those were not my men in the Crimea. I'm not going to invade Ukraine. The US should be very careful about forcing Ukraine into making concessions without making sure that those are
this day when we remember the history, it is still alive for many Poles, isn't it? Your government has called for compensation for the few remaining survivors, Polish survivors of what the Nazis inflicted. You still want what Poland went through to be reflected in a way it hasn't so far?
There is going to be a monument in Berlin, and yes, you're right. We think Germany would improve its image if it made a gesture towards Polish survivors, and we would like to invest in the common future. We have a common threat of Russian Iskander missiles and a store of nuclear weapons in the Kaliningrad exclave. That's something that Germany and Poland could face up to together.
Radek Sikorski, Foreign Minister of Poland, thank you for joining us from Warsaw.
It's just after 7:15 here at the Bells, where I am, just outside Westminster Abbey, but to a different story entirely, away from the commemorations for VE Day, for the 80th anniversary. It's been reported that the Israeli embassy in London was the alleged target of 5 Iranian men who were arrested in raids at the weekend on suspicion of preparing an act of terrorism. Police have not yet confirmed that the embassy in Kensington was the suspected target. That was first reported by The Times, citing operational reasons, but the BBC understands that that report is accurate. Security officials have repeatedly warned of the increased threat from Iran and that international tensions could spill over into violence on the streets of the UK. Robin Simcox joins me now, the Commissioner for Countering Extremism. Good morning.
Good morning, Emma.
How unusual would it be for an embassy to be targeted like this here in the UK?
In the UK, quite unusual, though it's worth pointing out that even that specific embassy was actually allegedly targeted recently. There was a man who was charged with preparing an act of terrorism just last month, who was attempting to break into the Israeli embassy in West London armed with a knife. The Iranian, for example, regime focusing that kind of target within the West is rare. It does happen. The US previously reported a Iranian linked plot to assassinate the Saudi ambassador in Washington DC, and last year a couple of grenade attacks took place against Israeli embassies in Sweden and Belgium, again both linked back to Iran. Now this isn't always completely obvious to the Iranian regime doing this. They don't advertise it. Criminal gangs use proxies, drug traffickers and the like to provide a kind of semblance of distance between them and the act itself. But it would not be so unusual to see this happening in the West, because there is precedent.
And in terms of then looking at the activities of Iran, even if there's no responsibility taken, what is your advice as the Commissioner for Countering Extremism to the government and to those who keep us safe about how to handle the threat from Iran?
Well, I think the first thing to say, I think generally from a public understanding perspective, the scale of Iranian-backed activity in this country is probably underestimated. We're increasingly aware of the hard power side of things, but Iran also wants to spread its influence in the UK via religious institutes it controls, television channels, charities, educational institutes, online disinformation campaigns, all by organisations that share Tehran's aims and objectives and presented it as I suppose, a religious obligation for Shia Muslims inside and outside of Iran to display obedience to the supreme leader. In terms of what happens next, obviously there's a lot of moving parts to do with Iran and the nuclear question, for example, and I focus on the domestic extremism side of things.
Robert, just to come in before you move on, why is it underestimated, do you think, and by who?
Well, because it's not always very visible. When you think about terrorist attacks in the UK carried out by Al-Qaeda, ISIS, whatever it may be, they are claimed by the organisations, they're proud of them. The Iranian activities, I think, are a bit more subversive and a bit subtler. They are probably a bit more strategic in their targeting. And we have been trained, I suppose, over a course of years for understanding reasons. Think of non-state actors carrying out acts of violence in our countries, whereas Iran as a state needs to become increasingly brazen in the things it would consider doing in our country in order to advance its objectives. It's an outlier, I suppose, which is what makes it so unusual, makes it hard to combat.
Robin, thank you for putting us in the picture, the Commissioner for Countering Extremism. We can hear
you seen crowds at all yet, or is it a little bit early for people to be joining you there outside Westminster?
In true Today programme style, we're very early. I'm going to put it. No, it's starting. There's lots of people working to get various gazebos and tents ready, and obviously a lot of security, I suppose, in line with what we're just talking about, and many operations. But people are just starting to walk through perhaps to their jobs nearby. But a lot of barricades up. As is often the way in this part of the world, you know so well, when there are major commemorations and royals being prepared for.
You know where to go, I'm sure everyone appreciates a nice hot cup of tea or coffee down there. It's 21 minutes past 7 now. Now we know what Donald Trump was talking about when he teased what he said would be a big announcement made by the end of the week. It is a trade agreement, and it is with the UK. What's not known yet is exactly what it will and won't include. Let's talk to our business editor Simon Jack about what he knows. We maybe should start, Simon, with what this isn't. It isn't what Boris Johnson used to talk about, is it? The full, fat, free trade agreement.
No, it's not. That kind of agreement is what we saw with India earlier this week, where you've got a comprehensive trade deal with all sorts of clauses and full big documents. This is, I would say, more like a tariff pact, a tariff tweak, a tariff exemption, because at the moment there are 25% tariffs on aluminium, steel and cars, and 10% on just about everything else. And what we're expecting is that there could be some progress on lowering those tariffs on steel and cars. The cars, pretty much our number one export to the US, those are bitten hard. We've seen Jaguar Land Rover, which sold 100,000 vehicles in the US last year, temporarily paused shipments because of the impact of those tariffs. Now, what will be interesting is to see whether there's overall tariff reduction, or whether they opt for some kind of quota system, like you have this much for free or a low tariff, and anything above that would be a higher tariff. Now, that is something the currency would like. From that 25%, but in the words of one executive I spoke to yesterday, even a quota system is better than nothing.
Simon, I'm going to interrupt you for 2 seconds, only because as you were speaking, Downing Street has just confirmed that the Prime Minister will make an announcement about a deal with the United States on tariffs later today. We were pretty sure it was going to happen. We had that confirmation from this side of the Atlantic. A spokesperson for Number 10 said the Prime Minister will always act in the national interest. I think they put that at the top of every press release that they release for workers, for business and families. The United States says the statement, an indispensable ally for both our economic and national security. Talks on a deal will continue. And what I think we'll look for there, won't we, Simon, is what concessions have been made in order to get a reduction in tariffs. There could be things the government here has agreed to do to try and cheer Donald Trump up a bit.
Yeah, and a leading candidate for that, for the concession made by the UK, would be something called the digital sales tax, which is 2% tax on sales for the big digital companies, the Amazons, the Metas of this world. Now, that was supposed to raise about £800 million a year, so giving that up is not trivial. And also, don't forget, it was put in place in order to level the playing field between the digital sellers and the high street. So I say, not a trivial giveaway. We'll find out more later today.
Simon J, thank you.
It's 24 minutes past 7 here. The bells tolling here in the background of where we're coming to you from this morning, all morning from outside Westminster Abbey, ahead of the service to mark 80 years since the end of World War II. The more of that service starts at noon, and the King and Queen will be in attendance alongside the Prince and Princess of Wales and the Prime Minister. It's a service of thanksgiving and remembrance, two very key elements. And alongside the moments of sombre reflection today in the Abbey and across the country, there will be, of course, joy, the restaging of the celebration and relief as the war came to an end, and pubs in England and Wales are being allowed to stay open until 1 o'clock in the morning. Valerie Giddings and Veronica Kirby are twins from Barry in South Wales. They're a bit young for the pubs. Back in 1945, they were just 6 years old on VE Day. And I had a conversation with them and asked them what they remember of that day itself.
Great excitement in all the houses round where we live. Everyone was coming out and shouting and carrying on. It was really a tremendous time. It's indescribable, really. was so relieved. It was an impromptu street party, and everybody just brought out what they had, and it was wonderful. Even the music teacher in the street allowed her piano to camp out in the road. We lived not far from King Square, and there were lots of celebrations going on there, but we were considered too young to go, so our elder brothers went. But when they came back, they were full of it and was telling my mother all about it, and so she relented and she took us down, and we'd never been in such a crowd before, so I hung on desperately to my mother as I was nervous about it, and I didn't really know what people were doing. There was this long line, and they were all going one behind the other, holding on to one another and singing a song and throwing their leg out to one side, only to be told later that they were doing the conga. So the moment we got back home, much to my brother's sorrow, we had them doing the conga around the house. And I remember mostly the thought that we were going to have jelly. We were so excited to have this jelly, but unfortunately it was not nice. They poured boiling water on some crystals, and the taste of, well, similar to sherbet, I think. It was dreadful, so that bit of excitement didn't last, but the rest of it was marvellous. And that was echoed in the four sons who never came back. So even though they actually came out to join in just to be sociable, heavy hearts, because they didn't have a family anymore. So there was a mixture of emotions, even though people tried hard not to show it.
And it's important to remember that in the context of what had been going on. And bringing up family, do you feel that the two of you being together as twins the whole way through this was very important?
Oh, most definitely, because we always had each other. So if we heard aircraft coming over in the night prior to us going down into the air raid shelter, we had each other to talk to, and we could hold on to each other. And I definitely think it made a huge difference. There was always someone by your side, and it made a huge difference that we had a cat. It did. Yes. Oh dear, we didn't go anywhere without Toby, our cat, so he was on the bed. And then when we went down to the air raid shelter, Veronica and I, our concerns were only get the cat in the shelter. But it was part of the family, so it's funny, you know, the things that are important to you when you're younger, but the cat certainly was.
Indeed. Well, thank you for painting such a vivid picture from both of you.
Lovely to speak to you.
It's a pleasure.
Yes. Some lovely voices, some lovely memories of EE Day, more coming up throughout the programme. Come in now, Mike's here with the sport.
Nick, thank you. Talking once again this hour about Champions League heartbreak for Arsenal in Paris.
There's the final whistle, and Paris Saint-Germain have knocked out Arsenal in the semi-finals. Paris Saint-Germain are going to Munich. Arsenal are out. These two clubs with their big dreams of winning the Champions League. Well, not this year for Mikel Arteta and Arsenal.
The team that I've seen today against probably one of the best, or not the best team in Europe, it gives me so much pride. But at the same time, I'm so upset, so annoyed that we didn't manage to do it.
The crestfallen Mikel Arteta there after his Arsenal side were beaten by Paris Saint-Germain in their Champions League semi-final second leg, 2-1 on the night, 3-1 on aggregate. You heard football correspondent John Murray describe the full-time scenes there. He joins us live from Paris now this morning. Hi, John. Good morning. You heard how disappointed Arteta was there. He believes that Arsenal were the best team in the Champions League this season. Is he right?
Well, it sparked something of a debate that the cold hard fact is that Paris Saint-Germain won both in London and here in Paris. And I would say, yes, Arsenal were very good in the opening period of the match. The PSG goalkeeper Donnarumma played a star role yet again, as he has now during the course of what I would call an English treble that PSG have recorded. They've knocked out Liverpool, Aston Villa and Arsenal in successive rounds. And had Saka scored a late second goal for him and for Arsenal, we might have had a grandstand finish, but he didn't. And I would contend that it is PSG, the French champions, not Arsenal, who have been one of the, if not the team of the season in the Champions League.
Donnarumma, their goalkeeper, surely a contender now for best goal. keeper in the world. It's a curious one for Arsenal, isn't it, John? Because they, on the face of it, they've had a season most teams would bite your hand off for. Second in the Premier League, a Champions League semi-final, and yet there is frustration, isn't there? And criticism this morning of Arteta and Arsenal. People feeling they just keep falling short.
Yeah, the scrutiny will intensify. It already has, because while the upward progress under his management, where he's taken Arsenal since he took over, 5.5 years it is now, it's been an impressive upward curve, but he's not won a trophy since his early months in the job back in 2020, the FA Cup, and that is the currency on which the top managers are judged, and they've spent somewhere between 700 and 800 million pounds on new players at this time, and yes, they've come up just short in the Premier League again. They've not yet nailed down their place in the Champions League for next season. It's a big summer coming up for them. The pressure's going to be on to sign, most obviously, a centre forward who can help make the difference, help them take that next step. So yeah, the pressure will be on at the start of next season.
So the Champions League final now will be Paris Saint-Germain against Inter Milan on the 31st of May. John Murray live in Paris. Many thanks for that. Just briefly in rugby union, Maro Itoje set to be confirmed as the new British and Irish Lions captain for this summer's tour of Australia. The 30-year-old is expected to be announced as skipper along with the rest of the team at an event in London this afternoon, and the former England teammate Chris Ashton agrees with the selection.
Maro's the man for me. He's been so consistent for years and years, taking the captaincy for England on in his stride, been really good at adapting to and dealing with the younger generation of players, and it's gone really well.
Maro Itoje will be the first Englishman to captain the Lions since Martin Johnson in 2001.
Mike, thanks very much. Just after 7:30, I can tell you this about the weather, that today will be dry and settled. Northern areas will start sunny, but it will soon turn variably cloudy for all of the UK. My own micro forecast for you from outside Westminster Abbey is that it's very, very cold, but we've just had a hot cup of tea. We found one, Nick.
Excellent. It's 27 minutes to 8 o'clock. You're listening to Today with Emma Bonnet outside Westminster Abbey. Just a little bit chilly. Nick Robinson, nice and warm in the studio alongside James, who's got a social news.
A new deal on reducing tariffs between Britain and the United States is expected to be unveiled later today. President Trump posted on social media that he would announce an agreement with what he called a big and highly respected country in the White House, although he did not identify the nation involved. The UK government has been seeking a deal since Mr. Trump imposed tariffs on almost every country as part of his Liberation Day last month. A service of Thanksgiving will take place at Westminster Abbey to mark the 80th anniversary of VE Day. Veterans, the King and Queen and the Prime Minister will attend. During the service, the great-great-grandson of Sir Winston Churchill, 10-year-old Alexander Churchill, will light a candle of peace. Iran's foreign minister has said his country categorically denies being involved in any plot to target the Israeli embassy in London. The BBC understands the building in Kensington was the alleged target of a group of Iranian men arrested on suspicion of preparing a terrorist act. 4 men are still being questioned after a series of police raids. 9 men have been arrested as part of an investigation into a group who allegedly celebrated the birthday of Adolf Hitler at a pub in Oldham with cake and Nazi memorabilia. Greater Manchester Police said they were being held on suspicion of public order offences. The energy firm Scottish Power will be loaned £600 million by the government to build new power cables under the North Sea, which will help reduce the electricity from wind turbines that goes to waste. A large amount of power generated offshore in Scotland is lost each year because the grid doesn't have the capacity to carry it to England, where there's more demand. Space agencies around the world are closely tracking a Soviet-era spacecraft to determine where it might crash back to Earth. Parts of Cosmos 482, which have been stuck in orbit since 1972, are expected to re-enter the atmosphere this week. It's still unclear where any debris might land, but scientists say it's most likely to end up in the sea.
Thank you. It's coming up to 24 minutes to 8 now. Tensions remain high after the worst outbreak of violence in 2 decades. The long, tense and dangerous standoff between India and Pakistan, 2 nuclear-armed neighbours whose mutual animosity is focused on the disputed region of Kashmir. Pakistan says 31 people, including women and children, have been killed by Indian airstrikes, which Delhi says were in response to a deadly attack that killed several tourists in Pakistani-administered Kashmir. The BBC's Pakistan correspondent, Azadi Mashiri, now reports from Islamabad.
We drove up the winding roads and up the hills of Pakistan-administered Kashmir to reach this mosque. Pakistan's military tell us it was targeted by Indian airstrikes. But looking at it now, you wouldn't realize this was a place of prayer. It's been reduced to rubble. There are shards of glass all around me. The army took us to the site of this attack in Muzaffarabad. India says it targeted terrorist infrastructure based on credible intelligence. As we step out of the mosque, we meet Sarif, who lives right next door. The windows of his house are shattered. When was your daughter sleeping, Kahan?
My daughter was sleeping here. Then she woke up and walked towards me. That's where she got injured.
And what has the military told you about why your home was targeted?
Modi created this propaganda that this mosque is a terrorist mosque.
In a late-night address, Prime Minister Shahbaz Sharif vowed to avenge those killed in India's attack.
India made a grave mistake, and it will have to bear the consequences of its actions. This heinous act of aggression will not go unpunished.
The military claimed it shot down 5 Indian jets and a drone, but India has not commented, and the BBC cannot independently verify this information. Both Pakistan and India's armies say there was heavy firing across the line of control on Wednesday, with casualties on both sides of the de facto border. Meanwhile, diplomatic efforts continue. The United States and the United Nations are calling for both countries to avoid any further escalation. It's unclear whether Pakistan and India feel this chapter is resolved as they measure the fallout of recent events.
Azadeh Mashiri, our correspondent in Islamabad there, listening to that, our international editor, Jeremy Bowen. That, I imagine, is the question for the international community waiting and watching, Jeremy. Too soon, do you think, for a sigh of relief?
Thank you for watching.
No.